Previously on Unscripted.
No one's paying us to do this. We're not part of a conglomerate network or something.
We don't have to put a disclaimer says the opinions on this podcast are those of the host and not of XYZ Corporation. There is no XYZ Corporation.
You're listening to Unscripted with Skip Sherman and Josh Obadia.
Okay, Skip. Today we're going to talk about the Tragically Hip documentary called No Dress Rehearsal. But before we get into that, I want to let our listeners know why they haven't heard from us in a while. My father passed away just over a month ago. He had been hospitalized for almost 2 months before he died. During the past several weeks, I spent more time in Montreal than I did in Toronto. It was an extremely difficult time for me and my brother. I'm very sad about losing my dad, and I will miss him very much. He was an amazing person, but don't take my word for it. Ask anyone who ever met him. I'm just grateful that I was able to spend time with him before he passed away. And that is why we haven't recorded an episode since September. It's not easy to transition from a topic like that to the stuff we usually talk about, but we're going to try. So, do we have any listener mail?
We do have listener mail, but I just wanted to, chime in on, what you just said. You can go all the way back to episode 1 and why we started this podcast, right? I don't know. Do you remember the episode title of episode 1?
Therapy, something to do with therapy.
Exactly, podcast therapy. We do this podcast because if you know the origin story, it's like we used to talk on the phone every week or even more and have these huge long conversations about sports and movies and music. And one day we just said, let's record this stuff. And that's what we did. And that's what we still do. So we don't make money on this. We're not trying to get famous. People ask me, how have you done 300 episodes, even though you guys hardly have any listeners? We don't care. We're still going to keep doing it because we love doing it. I love talking to you we talk besides this, but I love recording this every 2 weeks. I just sat down. I'm like, man, I'm so excited to do this. And, we just want to have fun and just forget about all this crazy stuff going on in the world and just talk to each other, right? So that's what we're gonna do. Yeah,
I agree. This is it's a good excuse for us to always speak to each other on a regular basis, because I know I have some friends who I don't do a podcast with. In fact, all my other friends I don't do a podcast with, and I don't talk to them as much as I talk to you. So it's good that we do this.
Yeah. All right. So yes, we do have mail in the mailbag.
Mailbag.
Do you remember our last episode all back in September?
Let me see if I can remember that, actually.
You don't even remember what it was about.
I don't. I actually don't. I'd have to look it up. It's such a long time ago. I don't. And so much has happened since then.
Right. So it was our most overrated bands.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Right. So we got some mail from our good friend Jesse in Dallas, Texas, who is, another fellow podcast host. He has the Set Lusting Bruce podcast and the Perfectly Good podcast, John Hyatt podcast. From Jesse, he wrote, I would call them bands I just don't get. Here are my choices written down before I heard the episode. Steely Dan, Led Zeppelin, Grateful Dead, Rush, and Metallica. And, he goes into the different reasons why, but he said, I enjoyed your discussion and pretty much agreed with all of your choices. Even Kiss, who I adored back in 1977 as I was a high school senior, I still love, he said, I loved and still love Beth, Rock and Roll All Night, and many of the songs on Destroyer, but they are a meh band at best.
That's very good. I like his list.
Yeah. After that episode, I got a call from my uncle, Lenny, here in Montreal, and he wanted to tell me that his most overrated band is Chicago.
That's also a good one.
He said they had one song, 25 or 624, and that's it.
It's funny. I mean, I do know that song, but I don't know if that's the most popular song that I would have thought of.
Yeah, well, because after that in the 80s and in the 90s, they were kind of easy listening. You know what I mean? It's not the same Chicago from the 70s. Derek from here in Montreal, kind of okay with most of your list except Nirvana. I mean, I knew that putting Nirvana in my list would obviously be controversial. He says, mainly because Smells Like Teen Spirit is one of my favorite songs of the 90s and helped usher the grunge movement. Can't disagree with that, Derek.
You did mention
has,
that. You did mention that when you listed them.
Yeah, Nirvana has their place in history. 100%. They are an important band when you talk about the history of rock because of like what Derek said. But I think that's their only album, right? And people regard them as this great band, where I think they are more of like, I don't want to say a one-hit wonder because that's not what it is, but it was like a one-album wonder. Jason from here in Montreal messaged me saying, I've delved back into your podcast archives to listen to old shows. I love the Apartment Stories episode. You should do a top 5 of your favorite episodes of our own podcast. And actually, we have mulled that over many times. I'm not sure. I think we did a long time ago where I don't know if it was specifically a top 5, but I think we talked about our favorite episodes that we've done. Yeah, I think we may have done that. I remember here sitting in my basement and doing it in person. No?
It's possible. And maybe it was only our favorite from the past year, not favorite of all time.
Yeah. God, our memories suck.
But luckily we recorded it, so if we forget anything, we just go back and listen.
Well, yeah, exactly. Mark from Philadelphia suggested a topic because he heard some obscure songs on the radio, and it took him back to a specific moment in time that he remembered listening to this song, in the 80s. So he suggested that we do a songs that take you back to a specific moment in time. When you hear it, you remember of something specific. I think that could be an interesting topic. It's a lot of research for us, but definitely doable. And he also recommended a podcast to me, but I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. Jason Alexander apparently has a podcast.
He does. I've listened to it. It's been around for a few years now.
So is it good?
I didn't like it. I only listened to, I guess, maybe 4 or 5 episodes, and then I stopped.
Okay.
He has a co-host who I've never heard of.
Okay.
And I think they do have like a different guest every episode, if I recall. It's been a while.
Okay. And finally, the last mail, Cheryl from Montreal. She said, just listened to the podcast, really enjoyed it. You guys have great chemistry. Although she told me separately in a private conversation that she disagreed with my overrated bands. She didn't get into details. Other than that, she didn't like my choices.
Someone told me that they didn't like my number 1 choice, Red Hot Chili Peppers.
I mean, music is an amazing thing, and that's why we talk about music so often, right? Because it's very personal, right? And there are a lot of music snobs out there. I think I used to be one of them, where if you like a certain music, that sucks. You must be weird, or you have bad taste in music because you like X artist, or you have bad taste in music because you don't like X artist. And I think that was my attitude like in the 90s. But now, anything goes. I like, even me personally, I like music now that I hated when it was out. Like, I like Wham and George Michael. I'll listen to that in the car and I'll turn it up. And when that was like actually popular, I thought that was garbage, So tastes change, seasons change, You go through
also,
stuff.
When we were roommates in the 90s, you never would have listened to Casey Musgraves or Taylor Swift.
Absolutely not, Maybe Casey. She's like, I did like Sean Colvin back then, so that might have been the start of that kind of female country vibe. I don't know.
Okay, we'll be right back after this to talk about the Tragically Hip documentary, No Dress Rehearsal.
You're listening to Unscripted.
I'm Joseph DeMedictis.
And I'm Ross Citrulo.
And we're doing this podcast so we don't have to go home and get a real job.
Exactly.
That's right. And we're doing it to tell you about our pursuit of the dreams we've had since being a kid, being young, trying to get into the entertainment industry. Us, we're mid-career, sort of. We're kind of halfway broken in a way. But we both have these big dreams and big goals.
Aspirations, really.
For our careers.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. This podcast is about the journey through the industry, trying to make it, but trying not to have to give up.
So listen to our podcast on all the places you might listen to a podcast: Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
We have our own YouTube channel where you can watch the video version. All the links can be found at you'llnevermakeit.ca. Here's hoping we do.
And now, back to Unscripted.
Okay, Skip, we're back.
All right. So you since you couldn't even remember the topic from last time, you don't you don't remember that I mentioned in my closing remarks that that I had watched this documentary and that you should watch it because it should be our next topic. Little did we know that the next topic would be like almost 2 months later, right? And now we're going to finally talk about the Tragically Hip documentary, No Dress Rehearsal, which is available on Amazon Prime. Weirdly, like I was a little bit surprised of all the places it was available. But
By the way, I was planning to watch it, even if you had not recommended it or suggested it. I was planning to watch it anyway.
I mean, no one's a bigger Hip fan than you that I know.
I know one who's bigger than me.
So I'm just going to like set the scene. So, in case if you don't know who the Tragically Hip is, go look them up and listen to the music. I can't help you any further than saying that. But we're not going to go into like a beginner Tragically Hip class here. If you don't know the band, maybe this isn't the episode for you. But No Dress Rehearsal is a documentary that was made by directed and produced by Mike Downey, who is the brother of Gord Downey, obviously the lead singer of the Hip who passed away, and then that kind of ended the band actually, which is what they show in the documentary. It was kind of interesting. It's 4 episodes on Amazon Prime and it's almost 4 hours, and I was wondering because I know that they premiered this movie at the Toronto Film Festival. Did people actually sit there for 4 hours and watch this in one shot?
I think they only showed the first 2 episodes at the premiere because my friend Willem, who is a bigger Hip fan than anyone I know, he was actually invited to the premiere in Kingston.
Oh, wow.
And he told me afterwards that at the premiere, the live premiere where the band members were there, they only showed the first 2 episodes at that premiere. So I'm assuming they did the same thing at the Toronto Film Festival.
Okay, that makes more sense because I was like, how is it possible? Like, you wouldn't even want to subject people to 4 hours, So,
I know. I didn't watch it all in one 4-hour sitting. I didn't. So.
No, I watched it like one at a time, probably over 4 days or 3 days, right? Maybe I watched 2 in one time. You know what I really liked about this documentary? I know it's going to sound stupid, but of course, Gord Downey is a major focus of the thing. Like he has to be, and episode 4 is like extremely emotional, and it's mostly obviously about him. But I really liked how the focus was on the whole band, right? And obviously the band is the ones that are being interviewed throughout, because they're all of them are still alive and they're talking about what happened in the past. But I really liked how they focused on the Hip wasn't just Gord Downey and 5 backup players, right? It was the band, right? And I think that came through, and I think it's important, so.
There's an interview that the band did many, many, many years ago that I've seen myself many, many times, where I think it might have been on Much Music, and they asked Gord, I don't remember what the question was, but his answer was, we're a group, we're a team. So everyone gets equal credit for everything that we do, because it wouldn't make sense if one of us was driving a Mercedes and the other guys were riding bicycles.
Right.
That was, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that was that was something like what he said. So he always wanted everyone to get equal billing.
Right. But the other part that was interesting is that the songwriting, actually the lyrics, it was at the beginning, it was Gord, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was Gord and maybe Gord Sinclair who was writing the lyrics with him.
I think you're right.
And then at a certain point, it was mostly just Gord Downey himself, right? Like, kind of took over.
So this is one of the things that I learned from the documentary that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
So Gord moved to Toronto. The rest of the guys stayed in Kingston. So they were apart. And that led to some, I guess, friction in the band. because, when they had to record and, either he had to go to Kingston or they had to go to Toronto or they had to go to a completely different location. And so they sort of didn't feel like, I guess, best friends for a period of time there.
Yeah.
And so yes, there was one or maybe two albums where I think Gord Downie wrote everything, and then the other band members were just called in to do their parts, and then they left, sort of thing.
Right. That sounds like the Beatles, like you hear the stories about the Beatles at the end, Paul McCartney wrote a bunch of songs and they'd come in, they record them. John Lennon would write some songs, they'd come in and they record them, and then they'd go their separate ways.
It's unfortunate for sure.
Well, I mean, when the band's been together for so long, I think this is kind of natural. But and then the movie's well done, but it is straightforward in its approach in that it's chronological and it shows us like the different eras of the band, so to speak. So like there's the origin, you see them in high school, and then there's the rise and the starting to get popular and then playing in bigger and bigger venues and, the concerts and different things that they did. And then the success that they had. And then, of course, the tension in the band that you just mentioned. And then the difficult part is the lead up to, we all know what happens. So that's why it's even more difficult to watch because you know where it's going. So the lead up to Gord's passing, and then episode 4, which is very difficult to watch in some parts, especially we're seeing behind the scenes footage of Gord with his family, things about Gord in literally his last days, which is like really personal, and to put that in the documentary was like a big decision, I'm sure. So like it ends with Gord's death and then the aftermath, like what happens after, which is kind of where we're at now.
Yes, I agree. And also what I was impressed with, especially in episode 1, they show you all this old footage.
Yeah.
And nowadays, everyone's got a phone everywhere they go, and there's so much stuff captured nowadays. But back then, no one had smartphones. And yet somehow someone had the presence of mind to record some of their first ever shows. I don't know who did the recording. I don't know what method they used. I remember those big handy cams that were really heavy that people used to carry around. I don't know if that's what they used to record, but the fact that they had so much old footage impressed me. I was amazed.
The documentary literally starts with them in high school,
Yeah. Oh, and that's the other thing I liked about it, because I guess the first scene of episode 1 is present day, and you see the current members walking into their old high school. I thought that was pretty cool as well.
The origin story is actually really interesting to me because it's stuff that I didn't know. There's a lot of stuff in this documentary that I'm like, I knew about this. Like, there's things that I'm like, yeah, we know about these things. Like, if you're a huge fan, you've heard about, that, like, there's the Peter Mansbridge interview where he asks him, by the way, what is your name? And he writes Peter on his hands, so he doesn't forget, and like these things, like I've seen those kind of things before. But the stuff in high school with how they met, I didn't know any about this. I didn't know anything about this. And it's kind of interesting, I got a really huge respect from watching this documentary for Rob Baker. I think he's like an incredibly talented guitar player, but also seems like really intelligent and like kind of like understands himself and the band. Like he's kind of like this philosophical guy, right? I really liked when he was on screen, so.
And what I was also, again, you're talking about learning things. I don't remember seeing Gord Downie with a beard. In episode 1, he's almost always in a beard or has a beard, and I don't even remember that.
Yeah. I don't know. Pretty crazy. There's some stuff there that was interesting. Like I learned about like a few weird things, right? First of all, there was a saxophone player at the beginning, like when they were really, really early days, like
right. And he was like much older than all of them. Like they didn't meet him in high school. He wasn't one of their fellow students.
That's right. So that was like, I was like, what? There's a saxophone player? Like, doesn't make sense to me. And then there's other weird stuff, like little quirks, that I didn't know about. Like, obviously Gord Downie has this incredible stage presence. with these kind of stream of consciousness, weird moments where he talks about crazy stuff on stage. I mean, that was part of the appeal of the band, right? Like you never knew what the hell he was going to talk about. And then one day he saw a video of himself and he thought like, he thought like, oh no, this is not good. I don't want to look like this. So he decided, okay, I'm going to have an acoustic guitar so that like he wouldn't like go crazy on stage and he'd have to sit there and play. And then they quickly realized this is no good. like this is no good.
The other band members didn't think it was good. I think Gord Downie thought it was good.
It was good for himself because maybe the way he saw himself or when he watched back performances. But as a fan, I mean, you want like Killer Whale Tank and all this crazy stuff that he says, you know, like so I mean, for me, like the Gord Downie jumping around like a maniac is like what you want to see.
Speaking of that, so they talk a little bit about how songs were written. And, you know, we hear these lyrics and we know them off by heart, but we don't know how they came to be. And so I think there was one time where Gord Downie was in a cab in New Orleans, maybe. And I think the driver might have said something to him like, you know, if you're going to eat the chicken, be careful, watch out for those little bones. Yeah. And I think that's partly how the song was written.
Look, I've never written a song. I don't think you have either. I think it takes a certain type of person to write a song. And you hear these stories about like, I mean, you're going to laugh because you know what I'm going to say kind of, but like you hear these stories about like how these incredible songwriters like Paul McCartney, you know, like they write songs. And it's like they could write a song in like a minute. Like, oh yeah, sit down, boom, 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 here's a song, you know? Other people draw from different inspirations, you know, and I think like the process of songwriting is really fascinating to me, you know, like he gets like one little tidbit from a cab driver and then turns that into a lyric, which turns into an entire song that, you know, 100,000 people will sing along to at a concert, you know, so it's kind of nuts.
So, you know, they went to record at least one of their albums in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And so they asked Gord Downie at the time, you know, why did you want to produce your album in New Orleans? So his answer was, it's a good 9-day walk back to Kingston from here. The distractions to leave or have friends come down would be minimized. So I found that very funny. And then I Googled it. You know, you could do Google Maps and see how long it would take to walk from one place to another.
Yeah.
And actually, if you wanted to walk from New Orleans to Kingston, it's not 9 days, it's 21 days.
Yeah, that makes more sense. It's maybe 9 days on a bicycle, right?
Actually, by bike, I did it. By bike, it's 6 days, and by car, it's 23 hours.
Oh, 23 hours is nothing. It's a straight shot right to Louisiana.
Exactly. The other thing I learned that I should have known, Gord Downie is left-handed, and I shouldn't be surprised because apparently left-handed people are more creative than right-handed people. I don't know if that's true.
I think that's a myth, but anyways.
So, I mean, you saw, I think it was in episode 3 where they were offered to do a gig at Tower Records. Yeah. I didn't know about that at the time. I only discovered that, you know, a few weeks ago. And there were a few other things in that episode 3 that I didn't know about. I didn't know that the band was having internal issues. It is interesting.
I remember at the time, like I wrote this down in my notes too. The movie really focuses on like the internal tension in the band at a certain point, and I'm like, I didn't know any of this. Like, I didn't hear about any of this. We didn't know about any of this. Like, is this real? Like what's happening here? You know? Yeah, it caught me off guard. Like all that stuff.
Yeah, they did a good job of keeping things quiet. I mean, obviously there wasn't as much social media or maybe any social media back then. So maybe it was easier to keep things on the down low, but I didn't know about the internal issues. And it's interesting because there was a time where I didn't stop following the band, but anytime a new album would come out, I would buy it. And then one day a new album came out and I just didn't buy it and I wasn't interested in it. And that sort of coincided with the time that they were having internal issues. I didn't know this back then, but I know it now. So maybe, you know, the fact that they were having those internal issues led to the quality of the stuff they were producing.
I'm sure it did, actually. I'm sure it did, for sure. Yeah.
The other thing I found interesting, so they interview Gord Downie's daughter.
I love that.
I think her name is Willow.
Willow. I love that part with Willow. It was
Me too.
very, yeah.
But one thing that I noticed, you never hear from, and they didn't interview Gord's wife. I don't even know her name.
No, I know. I think, actually I didn't even know he had kids. like the personal lives of this band were very personal, and I think they kept it separate. And they probably, obviously they probably asked everybody who wants to be in the movie. I'm sure they wanted his wife in it, and maybe she didn't want to, and Willow kind of just stepped up and said, yeah, I'll talk about my dad. I thought that was really, really cool. Willow expressing how proud she was to be his daughter, was really, really powerful.
I'm pretty sure Gord's mom was in the movie too.
She was, because she's kind of an important part of the story as well, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, it just goes to show you, the whole documentary portrays them as just regular guys. And they are just regular guys, and they don't want their personal lives being written about in the public eye. So,
yeah.
So they are just regular guys. In the last episode, they showed the live performance that they did with Feist. Feist was the lead singer for that one song that they did on the Junos. I remember watching that live. And I remember it was emotional for me watching it live, because it was the first time anyone had seen the band perform live since Gord Downie's death. And, they always said, we're not going to find another lead singer. We're not going to continue the band. But they did that for that one time. And I think it was done really, really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that performance as well. I think it wouldn't be fair to ask a man to be the lead singer even on one song, but I think a female, at least it gives it a different twist, right? And the band probably doesn't feel like he's being replaced, even if it's just for that moment, so.
The only other, I have one little complaint, and it's not about the documentary itself. It's about one of the people that were interviewed. So they interviewed a lot of famous people like Dan Aykroyd, Sam Roberts, Jake Gold, who used to be their manager, Denise Donlon, who used to be on Much Music, Will Arnett, Sarah Harmer. And they're all great. One of the people they interviewed, Jay Baruchel or Baruchel, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name.
Yeah.
He was like in a t-shirt and underwear, and his hair was all messed up, as if he just woke up. Could he not have combed his hair and put on some clothes?
Okay, you're not alone in this feeling, because just researching I looked up some reviews of the movie yesterday. I actually read gone on a Reddit thread about the documentary, and there's tons of people saying the exact same thing that you just said, which is did they knock on his door and wake him up and say, okay, we want to record your segment now? What the hell happened? He literally looks like he just woke up. And now I know this is Jay Baruchel. He's trying to look like Mr. Cool, hipster doofus. I don't know what kind of vibe he's going for. Maybe that's what he's trying to do. But it really was weird. It was weird, Yeah.
I didn't know this until you just told me this now. I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought that. So
no, it's there's a lot of people that literally said the same stuff as you just did. I really liked some of the celebrity interviews. Actually, forget about what Jay Baruchel looked like. I like what he said. He's the same age as us, right? Actually, so is some of the other people, but
I think he's younger than us.
Yeah, you're right. I think he's younger than us, but he's a fan, regardless, he's just a fan. And Dan Aykroyd was really good, and then you kind of get the gist of how they got onto Saturday Night Live. I think he was obviously instrumental in getting them on the show. And then Justin Trudeau, I really like the Justin Trudeau parts, because when he held up the vinyl of Up to Here, now I don't know if that's staged, I don't know what, I don't know, whatever, but he held up the album, and I was like, that's pretty cool, he is a fan, and you can say whatever you want about Justin Trudeau right now in Canada. There's so many people that don't like the guy and whatever. I'm not getting into politics, but there's the clip that they showed, and I remember watching that on TV the day that it happened, the day that Gord Downie passed away, and Justin Trudeau got in front of all the cameras, and he was crying. His eyes were red and bloodshot. And he's like, I lost a friend today. And that is really, really powerful. Like that says a lot about, you know, how he felt, how the whole country felt. Like the prime minister's job is to represent the country, and I think in that moment he represented the country exactly how we all felt, you know. So,
And I think there's a famous tweet. I don't even know who tweeted it, but it's something like "Country closed today, death in the family."
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's funny, that whole story about how they wanted to name the Road Apples album Saskadelphia,
Yes.
which is a freaking weird name. Like I completely understand why the record company said no, that's a stupid name. So it's funny how things happen, right? Because we would never know. Although they did release a mini album like a few years ago, right? Saskadelphia with like
Yeah. With
know,
I
the
think it had
demos
4
of-
songs on it.
yeah, the demos or live versions of some of the Road Apples songs. But
But the
I
other
really like
funny
that
part
record.
about that story is, so they ended up using Road Apples as the title.
Yeah.
And we as Canadians know what road apples are, but the American record company had no clue what it meant.
Yeah,
That's
were
why they agreed to use it, because had they known, they probably would have vetoed that as well.
they're basically giving the middle finger to the record execs, saying screw
Right,
you.
exactly.
Not exactly a smart thing to do when you're trying to like get famous, but let's talk about this. Like there's so much made in the documentary about how they were trying to be successful in the US, or maybe they weren't trying that hard, or that it just wasn't working and they weren't breaking through with the US audience. Like it's really an important part of the documentary. It's like a theme. And like as a fan in the 90s of this band, I couldn't care less. I didn't care. I never cared that they made it or didn't make it in the US. When they were on SNL, I was like, that's really cool. Oh my God, that's amazing, right? But like, honestly, like, it wasn't a concern. Like, I just felt like this is a Canadian band, and we all know that they are representing Canada. And whether they're famous in the US or not, I don't care. I just want them here, right? I want to go see them at my venue. I want them to come to Montreal and go see them at the Forum or the Bell Center. Or, I mean, we saw them at some crazy places, Josh. like, so
It's funny because actually I had a different take on that. So at the time when I was whatever, much, much younger, it always bothered me, and I don't know why. It bothered me that the Hip were not as popular in the United States as the Bare Naked Ladies.
yeah,
Like, to me, this was so backwards. It was so wrong. Like, how can you people like the Bare Naked Ladies more than the Tragically Hip? What is wrong with you?
yeah. You know, in the 90s, we had a bunch of Canadian artists that made it huge, right? Sarah McLachlan, you know, she won like Grammys, and like she was like at one point she was at the top, right? Alanis Morissette, like her first album, that thing was huge, right? She was massive in the States. And you mentioned the Bare Naked Ladies, and then I know it's not the same type of music, but Celine Dion, that's the biggest singer in the world for a few years, right? And then how is it possible? But Bare Naked Ladies is a great comparison, you know, because this is kind of like a comedy band at the beginning, right? Like this is what they are, right? And then yeah, I like your take there, but like it's interesting that it bothered you, but like I never had a concern. As long as I could go see them in concert, it didn't care. As long as they kept putting out music, you know, as long as not being successful wasn't going to stop them from making more albums. Like it didn't bother me. So like the most important thing I'm going to tell you here is that like obviously the Gord Downie death stuff in episode 4 and the family and everything we see behind the scenes, like it's extremely emotional, and we can do a whole like that's obviously a huge part of the movie. And you know what makes a movie good is, you know, when you feel invested in it, when it's like you feel like it's speaking to you in a certain way. And obviously I was sad when he died, and it was difficult to watch and emotional to see his everything, all the stuff surrounding his death. But like earlier in the movie, what spoke to me is like we live this stuff, you know, like we live this stuff. They're talking about playing small venues. We started off playing small venues. Like I remember we went to see them at like a hockey rink at like University of Montreal. Like I was sick as a freaking dog. I was so sick. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, told me, don't go. You're so sick. You're crazy to go. I hopped myself up on every kind of like cold medicine. Like I overdosed on, Tylenols, Advils, cold medicines to like get me through the night. And we went to that concert and it was amazing, And then
There was no way you were missing the concert. There was no chance.
No chance. And then, they go into, in the movie, they talk about another roadside attraction tour, the outdoor festival type of tours. And I didn't know there was a third one, but like I know we definitely went to the first two. They were actually at a weird spot. It was like next to the Verdun Arena, where there's like a patch of grass. It was really bizarre. Like I don't understand like how that was even a thing. And then of course, they do show in the movie Midnight Oil, and how when they asked Midnight Oil if you want to do this festival, they thought they were asked. They at first thought they're asking us to headline. Right? And then they're like, oh, by the way, you're not the headliner. It's this group, the Tragically Hip. And they're like, who are they? Right?
That was the best concert for me because I was actually a fan of both bands. So It's like normally when you go see a concert, you might have heard of the opening act. You might like them a little bit. But here, I liked both of them.
And the second one that we saw, Matthew Sweet was there. And at that time, I loved Matthew Sweet. I thought he was incredible. So that was also an amazing kind of opener for them, So like we lived those experiences, when they're showing all this stuff. I was like, yeah, we were there. We were part of that. And then of course, like when they're getting to the final tour, the farewell tour, basically like leading up to his death, you were there. I mean, you weren't at that final concert in Kingston, but you were at the second to last concert, which was in Toronto just a few days before.
Yeah, I was lucky to get tickets because it was sold out. And then I think they had this lottery where they were putting more tickets on sale behind the stage. And you can enter the lottery, not to win the tickets. You'd have to still pay for them. And I won the lottery. I think I found out maybe a week before or something. That I won the lottery. So I was lucky enough to purchase 2 tickets. And by the way, being behind the stage was great because you're actually closer to the stage.
Right. I mean, they do show it in the movie, everything leading up to the final concert and the final tour. That was a great behind the scenes look. How difficult it was for him. Like he didn't know the words. They had it on special teleprompters, down monitors on stage and different color coded for him to remember the lyrics. And actually the band saying like they didn't know if it was going to work. They didn't know if they were going to be able to do this tour because the first rehearsal was terrible. And they were like, how are we going to do this? Right? How is he going to do this? I've talked about this before. I think that the simulcast of the final concert in Kingston all across the Canada on CBC at the time, it was during the Olympics, if I recall, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah. During the Rio Olympics.
That is a moment of that. That's like, like they have these like 1 minute commercials, like part of our heritage, like the first woman to vote in Canada or the first, the
first flight.
Yeah. Like they have different like Canadian heritage moments. Like this is one, like the entire country watching this concert taking place in Kingston all at the same time. And Canada is a unique country because we are so far apart geographically, Montreal and Vancouver, this is another world, so the fact that the entire country watched this thing on TV all at the same time, it was an incredible sense of community for something that should be almost impossible to have. Like I felt much more of a sense of community watching this than when the Olympics are in Vancouver, and I'm watching the opening ceremonies in Vancouver. I'm like, oh, it's in our country. I'm like, yeah, but it's Vancouver. It's like, that's like another planet, so like, it's really like I don't know how to put it in words. And I've talked about this at least 5 times in our podcast over the years, probably about this simulcast. And I think it's just an incredible moment, like in Canadiana, so.
I mean, there's only like 2 things. There's the Hip concert that everyone watched at the same time. And there's anytime Team Canada hockey plays, the whole country is watching at the same time. And those are pretty much the only 2 things that the entire country can agree upon.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. Yeah, that is so true. Hockey, like, like Paul Henderson and like all these kind of like
or even Sidney Crosby or any Team Canada game where they, you know,
Yeah.
where the whole, because back when Paul Henderson, not everyone even had televisions back then yet.
No, you hear the stories in 1972 about how they kids were in school and they brought TVs into the classroom so the kids could watch.
Right.
There's the whole story about how he changed the lyrics in Grace 2 on SNL from "I'm fabulously rich, come on, just let's go." And when he got on stage and he started singing the song, he said, "I'm tragically hip." like it's kind of interesting. It's basically he just screwed up and then he said it. But then they talked about how in performances later they kind of became the lyrics instead. Like they often sang it live like that, afterwards. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the documentary, they did say that he screwed up, but I heard years and years and years ago that it was intentional. So
Whoa.
I don't know if we'll ever know the real story, but, either way is fine. Okay, we'll be right back after this with some final thoughts.
You're listening to Unscripted.
Hey everyone, Skip here. I'm really excited to invite all of you to follow my new account at Skip Cooks on Instagram and TikTok. I'll be sharing my love of cooking with recipes in the form of 1-minute music videos, all set to some of my favorite songs. Don't miss out, follow me, and let's have some fun in the kitchen.
Unscripted with Skip and Josh is available wherever you listen to podcasts. If you listen to the show through Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. To interact with the show, send an email to skipandjoshshow@gmail.com. Follow the show on Twitter and go to Facebook to like the show page. And now, some final thoughts from the guys.
So there's a couple of things I wanted to talk to you in the final thoughts. I have a bunch of notes. So it's weird because in our last episodes, like the last 5 episodes before this one, which is quite a long time ago, we always talked about baseball. Our last episode came out before the playoffs even started. And now we're talking here today and the World Series is long over. So we completely skipped all the incredible baseball playoffs. And I mean, it's too bad because we probably would have had a lot to say about, Aaron Judge dropping a fly ball, the fans reaching over and grabbing the ball out of the outfielder's glove. And there's Mookie Betts' glove. There's so many crazy things that happened in the World Series and the playoffs, right? Baseball playoffs are super fun. And I think the best team won. That's all I have to say. I mean, the Yankees certainly were not the best team. If you make 3 errors in 1 inning of a crucial World Series game and blow the game because you can't catch a fly ball and because you just don't cover first base, you don't deserve to win. You just don't, So congrats to the Dodgers. They have a $7 billion payroll and they used it well.
I mean, going into the series, I thought the two teams were relatively evenly matched.
100%.
The best team in the National League against the best team in the American League. And I legitimately thought it was going to go 7 games. And I thought that the home team would win every game. But I thought that it was so close. Mm-hmm. The difference between them was so fine that really the only difference would be the home field advantage. So I was completely wrong because the Yankees laid an egg. I mean, they should be embarrassed about the way they played in that game for sure.
But you're right that they're even. You're right that they're very even teams, and it should have been a longer series. What you didn't account for is that the Yankees played like little leaguers in the field and on running the bases. So that's just you can't do that. You just can't. You can get away with that. You can get away with playing bad defense through 162 games, which they did. And they hit 1 million home runs during the regular season, which overcame all their stupidity and all the stupid errors. Because if you followed the Yankees during the year, they haven't been a good defensive team all year. Although Aaron Judge is a good defensive outfielder, so he has no excuse for dropping that ball. But they've had terrible defense at first base for the entire season. And, it showed up again, right? So
even with that error, they were almost going to get out of the inning without giving up any runs. I'm talking about Aaron Judge's error.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah. They didn't have to throw the ball around right after that, and then they could have got out of it if Rizzo would have covered first or Cole. One of the two. I don't know who's at fault. Honestly, I don't even know who's at fault there.
So I had a dentist appointment this week, and I happened to
segue. Quick segue into dentist appointment. Yeah.
I happened to be wearing the friendship bracelet that your daughter made us when we went to the Bruce Springsteen concert.
Really nice, yeah.
So the hygienist who was cleaning my teeth, she saw that I was wearing a bracelet, but she couldn't see what it said on it. So of course she said to me, "Oh, did you go to the Taylor Swift concert?" And I said, "No, it's actually, if you look at it closely, it says Badlands. It's a Bruce Springsteen friendship bracelet because I went to the Bruce Springsteen concert." And then she asked me, "Which one did you go to?" Because he played in Toronto for 2 nights.
Yeah.
And I said, I went to the one in Montreal. I didn't go to the one in Toronto. And I asked her, like, "Did you go?" And she said, yes, she went to one of the Toronto concerts.
Wow.
I didn't know this, but you know a lot about Bruce Springsteen, and she knows a lot about Bruce Springsteen. And she says to me, he's very punctual and he doesn't like to be late. But the concert that I went to, this is not me, her saying this.
Yeah, it was an hour late.
It was like an hour and a half late because he was flying in from New Jersey. Like, so he didn't even sleep in Toronto the night before.
No, he doesn't stay over even like when he left Montreal, you figure, okay, he's going to Toronto now. No, he goes home to New Jersey, he chills for a couple of days and goes,
So I didn't realize that he goes back to New Jersey. Anyway, so yeah, that show, one of the 2 Toronto shows, started an hour and a half late because I guess his flight from New Jersey couldn't take off on time.
Your hygienist saw a great concert for only like the 3rd time in the last 2 years. He played Jungleland in that first Toronto show. So,
okay. I mean, and by the way, he still played his 3-hour show, even though it started an hour and a half late.
anyways, the Springsteen concert was super fun, and I'm glad we got a chance to go together. TV recommendations, because I've been watching a lot of TV, and it's been 2 months since I made any recommendations, and I think I recommended most of these to you, but I just want to tell the listeners. The Diplomat on Netflix, really enjoyed it. There's a show called Cross on Amazon Prime, Alex Cross. It's like a police type of show, very good. Nobody Wants This on Netflix, highly recommend. I don't know if Josh, if you started watching it yet, but it's like the comedy that came out of nowhere that is super charming. The Lincoln Lawyer, also on Netflix, worth watching. And there's a very good show on Apple TV called Drops of God. I won't even get into it, but I would highly recommend it. It might be one of the best shows. We're at the stage now where we're starting to think like into our final episode of the year. We're going to talk about what's the best show and the best movie we watched all year. So this one might be there, that show, Drops of God. It's really, really good.
So I haven't watched any of those, but when you said Lincoln Lawyer, was there not a movie like 10 years ago with Matthew McConaughey called The Lincoln Lawyer, or am I making that up?
No, maybe 20 years ago, but yeah, it is a movie. It was a movie with Matthew McConaughey. Season 1 of The Lincoln Lawyer is kind of the story of the movie, like, and then there's continuing, but it's based on a series of books. Like, it's a very famous book series. So there's many, many topics that they can do. The Lawyer happened to be about one book, and season 1 is kind of about that, and then it continues. But you should watch it, but you got to start at the beginning because you don't really care.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Josh. I love talking today about the Tragically Hip. It's our favorite topic, and then our second favorite topic, baseball. We did touch on it for a little bit. I can't wait to record again in a couple of weeks, and I'll talk to you then.
Have a great week.